All right, y'all. Well, it is 2 o'clock, so let's get started with unleashing potential, differentiating for struggling learners. If you have not been to one of these webinars before, hang on, pull your seatbelts tight as I say. It's going to be a very quick 30-minute webinar that just starts the conversation about differentiating for struggling learners. Today, you will not need a device to scan a QR code. Surprisingly, there are no QR codes, but we are going to try a few new technology tools. So bear with me and let's see how those new technology tools work out for us. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So first, right off the bat, here's one of our new tech tools. We're going to think about differentiating instruction for our struggling learners. So in just a moment, you're going to see an annotation, an annotation menu appear at the top of your screen. When that appears, you're going to select the T for a text box. That will provide a box where you can type your response to the question that you'll see on the next slide. Okay, you ready to try the new whiteboard feature in Microsoft Webinars? Here we go. So here's your question. I'm going to enable annotations for everyone. When you get there, you should see an annotation menu pop up at the top of your screen. You're going to select the T, which will provide you a text box. And then you're going to type your response to the question. What is the biggest challenge in differentiating instruction for struggling learners? So you can select your time, your T, click on it, start your box, and you should be able to type directly onto your screen in the text box. So share with us by typing in the text box on the screen, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to differentiating for struggling learners. I'll give you just a couple of minutes to get this populated because I realize it does take time. We are using the new annotation feature in Microsoft. Okay, I'm seeing some that won't let you type. It says everyone can annotate. So if it's not letting you type, feel free to throw that in the chat box as well. You know how it goes with new tech tools. We tried out internally and it works, but it may not work on your end or with your device as well. So share with us either on the screen if it lets you type on the screen or in the chat box. Share with us your question. So one for me, when it comes to one of my biggest challenges, differentiating instruction, time. I feel like there's not enough time. Oh, Michael's agree. Yeah, time. I agree. I struggle with that time. Scott's talking about like bridging understanding using language that they can understand. Absolutely. Bob's talking about like the ability of time to address. Exactly. That was my struggle. They're flying in the chat box very quickly now. Everyone doing something different. Yes. Getting on the same page. Time is definitely your biggest issue as well, Melanie. Yes. Accelerated courses definitely don't have enough time. Absolutely. The attention span of students, great. Let's see. If the text box isn't working for you, that's okay. You know how new technology is. You got to pivot sometimes. Feel free to drop it in the chat. Shane, getting them to ask questions, right? So these are all things that we struggle with instruction when we're trying to differentiate for those struggling learners. Absolutely. So there's lots of struggles. The good thing is we all seem to struggle with the same thing. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about, identifying effective scaffold strategies. We're also going to look at pre-teach and reteach strategies. And then we're going to look at formative assessments as a way to identify learning gaps for those struggling learners to really start to differentiate that for them as well. All right. So first, let's just start with the basic premise. So this is the second webinar in this 3-webinar series covering differentiation. Last week, we talked about differentiation, and it's really just a teaching approach that involves adjusting instruction to meet the needs of our students, right? We can recognize that they have different preferred learning styles. They might have different paces of learning, different interests. And this really aims to kind of provide a personalized learning experience for all students. Now, last week we talked about there's 4 ways or components of differentiation, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The first, why is differentiation important, right? Well, we know that it enhances student engagement, right? When students receive instruction that aligns with their preferred learning style and their interests, they're more likely to be engaged and motivated. We know it increases student achievement. So differentiation helps our students to access and understand the content at their own pace, which leads to improved academic outcomes. We also know that differentiation can help foster a positive learning environment. It creates a supportive and inclusive environment where all students can feel valued and respected in the process of learning. And what we do so well with career and technical education is it really prepares students for the real world. It helps our students develop those skills and adaptability needed to be successful in that rapidly changing world of work. All right, it's quiz time. So did you hear me say that there were 4 ways or components of differentiation that we talked about last time? Okay, so it is now time to take a quiz. So once again, we are going to try polls within Microsoft Webinar. And this poll or quiz will pop up on your screen. So I'm going to launch it now. It should pop up on your screen. When it does, there are 3 questions. The first question, adjusting the material presented to students based on their readiness level is what type of differentiation? Is it content, process, product, or environment? So you're going to select your answer, and then you're going to hit the next button at the bottom right. The next question, providing different ways for students to learn and demonstrate their understanding is what type of differentiation? Content, process, product, or environment? Select your response, and you'll go to the next question, which is the last question, number 3. When you get there, varying the types of assessments given to students, such as presentation or tests, are what type of differentiation? Content, process, product, or environment? When you've answered all 3 questions, hit the bluish purple submit button in the bottom left of your pop-up screen. And you'll be able to start to see the responses come in. So let's review those quickly. The first question asks about adjusting materials that we present to students based on their readiness level. So this is what's known as content. So we're differentiating the content for our students. And 71% of you got it correct. Congratulations. The next one, this one's kind of tricky. Are you ready for it? When we differentiate the way the students learn and demonstrate their understanding, that's the process. We're differentiating the process of learning and how they're going to demonstrate that understanding, right? So you might think it's product because product refers to like the assessment, but because we're also talking about the learning aspect, we're differentiating the process of learning. So process is the correct answer. The third one, when we differentiate those assessments, those presentations, final tests, you're absolutely right. Product is the way that we're differentiating. Congratulations, y'all did fantastic on that quiz. And now we're going to jump back. So you can hit the X on your poll if it's still in the center of your screen to get rid of that poll, and we'll keep moving on. All right, so the next one, let's talk about those 4 components of differentiation quickly. So first, that content, we're adjusting the material, how it's presented. The second is process. We're providing different ways for students to learn different access points in that process of learning. Product. We're allowing students to show us their understanding based on different types of assessments, projects, quizzes, anything that's going to showcase their learning. And then, of course, environment, we do really well in CTE because we have places where students can learn in the classroom, in the shop, in the lab. And so we're providing different environments for our students to be successful. All right, so let's think about this a little more. So that was our review of differentiation. So now let's look at scaffolding and how that can help our students, right? So this is just a way that we provide temporary supports to help our students access and learn new information, right? This can be like breaking down complex, difficult tasks into smaller ones. It can be creating manageable chunks of information. It can be providing guidance and feedback along the way. So on the screen, you just see 5 of the most popular ones, right? So modeling. We're just demonstrating the task for our students. Also, visual aids. This is things like charts, diagrams, images, anything to help our students visualize and understand a concept. And then we have chunking. This is where we break information into smaller, more manageable pieces. We also have things like providing cues and prompts, right? You can offer hints to your students to help guide them through their thinking. Then there's things like graphic organizers, Venn diagrams, KWL charts, anything to help students visualize the information. Also, you'll find guided practice. This is where we provide opportunities for students to practice new skills with teacher support. And we see a lot of this in our career and technical education courses. Also, providing feedback. That's a scaffold, right? Giving students specific and constructive feedback on their work. Next, using technology. So anytime you're incorporating a digital tool like an interactive simulation or some type of online resource to enhance learning, those are all scaffolds or temporary supports that we can put into place to help our struggling learners. Talking about that, there's also ideas of pre-teach and reteach. So these are essential strategies for ensuring that all students have a really solid understanding of the material, right? And these techniques involve providing additional supports, instruction before and after the main lesson to address learning gaps and prepare our students for success, which is our ultimate goal as educators, right? So when we think about, oops, I don't know what happened there. That was weird. When we think about pre-teach, we can think about using those graphic organizers again, so students can visually start to see the content and how it relates to each other. You can even think about vocabulary development, right? So introducing those key terms that you find in your textbooks before a lesson to help students start to build understanding and comprehension prior to diving into the content of the chapter. You can also see things like mini lessons where you have just a few really short lesson, and then you can check for understanding after that. Then when we get to things like reteach, you're going to see differentiated instruction, one-on-one tutoring, which really provides personalized attention to our students who are struggling with material. You're going to see small group remediation. You can see technology enhanced remediation. So using those digital tools to provide alternative ways for students to learn and practice. So just offering them different ways to access that content and experience the content. And then of course, reteach, which is at the end, is that repeated exposure. So provide multiple opportunities for students to practice and review materials. So have you used any pre-teach or reteach strategies in your class? If you have, drop them in the chat so that we can learn with and from each other during this session. All right, so we'll see if anyone pops up if you've used reteach or pre-teach strategies in your class. Don't forget, we'd love to learn with and from each other. So drop those in the chat. All right, so we talked a little bit about ways that we can provide scaffolds for students. Let's talk about ways that we can actually use formative assessment as a way to differentiate for our struggling learners. So we know that formative assessments are really powerful tools. They provide us as teachers and educators with real-time data about student understanding, and it allows us to adjust our teaching accordingly. So let's look at a few of those strategies that we can use with formative assessments. For example, have you used an exit ticket before? An exit ticket is just kind of a brief ticket or question at the end of a lesson to check for understanding with your students. But you could tailor them. For example, you could have a rating question, such as, how well do you feel you understood today's lesson? And students could rate it on a scale of like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Then you could add the second part of that exit ticket to be like, what was the most important thing you learned in today's lesson and why was it important? Because then you're going to notice what stuck with your students and learners. And then they're going to provide a little bit of insight into their understanding with how was it important. Now, if I were to differentiate using an exit ticket as a formative assessment, and I had a rating question and a word response tied together. I then could also sort through those responses, especially if I use technology like a Google form or Microsoft form. And I could view all the students who had low rating questions. So if they rated themselves on how they felt they understood today's lesson, like a 1, 2, 3, or 4, I could filter those and I could either provide a reteach opportunity to them, or I could do some other kind of differentiation or other strategies using that information the next day. Also, with those formative assessments, something that you can use as observation. So how many times have you used observation in your classroom, especially as a career and technical education teacher, right? You're just observing how students are doing with the activity, the skill, you're identifying their strengths, you're looking for weaknesses where they can improve. But this helps provide targeted support to students who may be struggling. Don't forget, if you've used any of these, please drop it in the chat so that we can learn with you. Then, another formative assessment is questioning techniques. So we can provide questions based on something like Bloom's taxonomy to challenge students at various levels. This is a great one because it can be done during a section of your chapter, after a lesson, at the end of an entire unit. So you could ask students questions about like, well, who was that? Or what was that? You could ask questions like, put that in your own words to help them explain. For application, it could be something like, what would be the results if something and something happened? Analysis, how was that similar to? Synthesis, design a whatever you're working on in that unit. And then of course, evaluation could be something like, how could you verify that? So you could challenge students, you know, what question do you want today for your exit ticket? Do you want a knowledge question, a comprehension question, an application question, etc.? This can also be done with your depth of knowledge questions as well. So there's several ways that you could use questioning techniques as a differentiated formative assessment. Other formative assessments, peer feedback, right? Have students provide feedback to each other. Also, self-assessment. You could have students set a personal learning goal for a lesson and then track their progress into achieving that goal. Along with that self-assessment, have you ever offered a differentiated rubric? So a rubric that might be tailored to different individual needs, or have one rubric for all teachers, because I struggled with time, one rubric, and allow them to select how many points they want to earn. There's things like portfolio assessments where they collect evidence of their own learning. There's things like conferencing, so those one-on-one meetings, allowing students to set individualized goals based on their needs and strengths. All right, let's check on some of the responses in the chat first. So I'm seeing several come in about observations. Yes, in career and technical education, we do that so well. Small group instruction, give a group as a given a chapter of concept to teach other groups. Yes. Michael, that's also like the jigsaw method. Great instructional strategy. Perfect. Shane's talking about how they come up with their own questions for the class based on the day's lesson for homework. Absolutely. So as you can see in the chat, there are so many ideas that you can learn with and from each other today. So don't forget to check out the chat. But let's also look at this. So in the chat box, which you all have found, share with us 3 ways that you can differentiate. What are 3 of those ways that you can differentiate instruction for your struggling learner? Let's see what you have to share in the chat. All right, so we're typing in the chat 3 ways that we can differentiate. So here comes some in. Tests with pictures, oral exams, project-based. Absolutely. David's talking about one-on-one. Absolutely. Robert's talking about asking the class to share different ways of constructing a circle with a CAD package. Absolutely. But these are all ways that we can differentiate in our class. Now, let's think about the last part of today's webinar so far. What are 2 ways that you could differentiate with assessments? Think about 2 ways you can differentiate formative assessments and share that in the chat. I'm seeing some really good responses still come into the 3, right? Small group, peer mentoring, rephrase the question, video presentation, and shop guided practice. Absolutely. Y'all are killing this differentiation. Let's talk about 2 ways or examples of how you can differentiate your formative assessments to help struggling learners. Yeah, peer assessment, presentations, right, Tim? That works. Absolutely. How else can we differentiate through formative assessments? Yeah, pre-test and post-test before the summative test. Absolutely. Yep, Charlie, various rubrics. We can provide different rubrics, or we can provide rubrics with different point values. Absolutely. When I was in the classroom, I had some assignments differentiated, and I had a mild, medium, and spicy because I'm originally from Texas and I like hot sauce. And my students could select if they wanted a mild, medium, or spicy activity for that day. Absolutely. Making a visual presentation, Antonio, that's a great way that you could differentiate your formative assessments. And Charlie's talking about like asking those differentiated questions. Yep. Peter's talking about the feedback questioning, Google morning questioning, proficiency skills, self-reflection. Absolutely. Those are all ways that you can start to differentiate your formative assessments. Let's go to the last one. So thinking about today's webinar, what is one question you still have about differentiating instruction for our struggling learners? So we've talked about scaffolding, pre-teach, reteach, and even formative assessments. What's one question you still have? Let's see what those are coming in the chat. And this is your last chance to type in the chat. Yeah, Charlie, so how do I put all of this together to help my students? Absolutely. I'm with you on that. I struggle with time, right? So I would pick one thing and do one thing. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Joe's note taker. Yeah, he's definitely coming in like use exit tickets with a rating scale and a short response to check for understanding. Incorporate differentiated questioning techniques based on Bloom's or DOK, depth of knowledge. Yeah, provide differentiated rubrics to allow students to select the number of points they want. Absolutely. Great ones, Joe. Also, Philip's talking about like, are there more effective with younger learners as opposed to college or mixed age learners? I would love to hear others' responses to that too. What I have found, surprisingly, as many of these instructional strategies I use in these virtual webinars and I use in live in-person events, I have used in classes in elementary, middle school, and high school. So a lot of these instructional strategies and ways to differentiate work for all age groups. Yeah, Philip, that's a popular question. You're getting lots of thumbs ups. People are agreeing with you, like, yeah. Also, Ron is talking about visual aids with the presentation and the addition of colors. Absolutely. All right, let's start to wrap this up. So today we talked a lot about scaffolding, which are temporary supports, pre-teach and reteach opportunities for our struggling learners, and formative assessment, ways to differentiate those for our struggling learners. So our last session in this 3-part differentiation series is going to be on October 22nd in 2 weeks. It's called Beyond the Textbook, Differentiation for Advanced Learners. So we're going to dive into enrichment activities, tiered rubrics, a little bit more than we discussed them today, and some independent study type projects. We're also going to look at some technology tools that can help fuel deeper learning and really think about some more practical challenges for some of our brightest minds in our classroom. Also, don't forget that you do have a certificate of attendance. It will be posted. It is added in the file section of this webinar, but I know sometimes that is blocked, disabled from different departments. So it is also located in the chat. There's a link that you can click on that will take you to a Google Drive folder. Everything should be located there. Also, while we're talking about that folder, you can access the recordings of these. So theoretically, teams should send out a recording. Sometimes people don't get that, and we want to make sure that you get it. So you can always access it on our YouTube channel. The link is also in the chat. While you're at the YouTube channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you can be notified when new content is added. And you can rewatch these webinars and share them with your coworkers. Also, if you would like a sample of any of the GW titles, you can scan that QR code and it will take you to a form to fill out, and you can request a sample of a GW title of a course that you teach. And then the last thing I'm going to show is our feedback form for today. And don't forget, all of these links are in the chat. The link to register for the webinar in 2 weeks, your certificate of attendance, the YouTube playlist, as well as the session feedback. So with that, we are going to say thanks so much for joining us this week. We hope to see you in 2 weeks for differentiation for advanced learners. Don't forget the feedback form. We love to make these better for you. So share what you liked. We'll make sure we do that more often. And with that, we hope you have a super week. The recording will be on the YouTube channel by the end of the week if you don't receive the email. And have a great week. Thanks for being with us today.